The defense line of Hive City Tertius broke at dawn, and the sky turned the color of bruised meat. Millions of Tyranid spores rained down from the clouds like black snow. They choked the air vents and clogged the gun barrels of the Imperial Guard. General Cage stood on the balcony of his command bunker and watched the end of his world. He had asked for help 3 months ago. The Departamento Munitorum had sent him paper forms to fill out instead of ammunition. Now his men were fighting with bayonets against monsters the size of tanks. The monsters had skin so thick that laser blasts bounced off them like rain on a window. Cage looked at his hands. They were shaking. He had not eaten a real meal in 4 days because the supply lines were cut. He only had a stick of dry starch and a cup of recycled water. The hunger made his head hurt, but the noise of the dying city was worse. Down in the mud below the wall, Trooper Vance fired his last power cell. His laser gun made a snapping sound and the red light died. A Hormagaunt leapt at him. The creature was all teeth and claws. Vance held up his empty gun to block the blow. The alien claw sliced through the steel of the gun like it was made of wet paper. Vance screamed as the beast knocked him into the grey mud. He waited to die. He closed his eyes and thought of the Emperor, but the killing blow never came. A low hum vibrated through the ground. It was not the scream of an alien or the roar of a tank. It was a sound like a giant bell ringing deep under the water. Vance opened his eyes. The alien on top of him was gone. It had been knocked backward by a pulse of purple energy. High above the battlefield, the clouds parted. They did not part for an Imperial Navy ship. The ship that came down was not a flying cathedral of stone and iron. It was sleek and black. It looked like a spearhead made of polished obsidian. It moved silently. There was no smoke and no fire from its engines. General Cage watched through his magnoculars. He had never seen a machine like this. Beside him stood Magus Delta 9. The tech priest wore red robes and had a metal face. The Magos made a clicking sound. He was confused. The machine spirit of his scanner could not read the black ship. The ship had no heat signature. It was invisible to their sensors, yet it was right there in front of them. The black ship lowered itself over the breach in the wall. The Tyranids swarmed toward it. They sensed biomass. They climbed over each other to reach the new prey. A hatch opened on the bottom of the black ship. A drop pod did not fall out. Instead, a dozen figures jumped. They did not wear the heavy, bulky ceramic plates of space marines. Their armor was tight and woven like muscle fibers. It was black with thin lines of silver. They landed in the mud without making a splash. The leader held a spear. The spear tip glowed with sonic energy. A massive Carnifex monster charged the leader. The monster weighed 10 tons. The leader did not move. He planted his feet. He thrust the spear forward. The spear tip hit the monster's thick skull. Usually, this would break the spear. But this metal did not break. It absorbed the force of the monster's charge. The spear vibrated. The purple light flared. The monster's head exploded from the inside out. The beast fell dead. Magos Delta 9 gasped. His metal voice box whirred. He zoomed his optical lens on the spear. He analyzed the metal. It was not steel. It was not adamantium. It was not any alloy known to the great forges of Mars. The metal absorbed kinetic energy and redirected it. It was impossible. It was heresy. It was beautiful. The figures in black armor moved like water. They were faster than human eyes could follow. They cut through the alien swarm. Every time a claw hit their armor, the armor glowed purple and pushed the enemy back. They were saving the breach. General Cage grabbed the railing. He did not know who these people were. He did not know if they were friends. But they were killing the monsters. The leader of the black-clad warriors looked up at the command bunker. He removed his helmet. He was human. He had dark skin and eyes that looked sharp and intelligent. He tapped his wrist communicator. A channel opened on General Kager's Voxcaster. The voice was calm and regal. It did not sound like a soldier. It sounded like a king. The voice said, "This is King T'Challa of the Hidden System. We have watched you struggle for too long. We are returning to the fold of humanity, and we bring gifts." General Kager looked at the Magos. The tech priest was trembling. The arrival of this ship changed the math of the war. But the Imperium did not like secrets, and this king had kept a very big secret for a very long time. The rescue had begun, but the crisis was just starting. The purple energy dome flickered over the breach in the wall. The Tyranid swarm hit the barrier again and again. Each time a monster clawed at the light, the energy pushed back. The creatures were confused. Usually, walls broke when hit. This wall just hummed and grew brighter. On the ground, the soldiers of the Cadian 812th Regiment stared in silence. They stopped firing their laser guns. They did not want to waste the charge packs. They watched the black-clad warriors move. The newcomers fought like dancers. They did not scream war cries. They did not rev chainswords. They used spears and circular blades that returned to their hands after being thrown. Trooper Vance pulled himself out of the mud. His leg was bleeding. He looked at the warrior who had saved him. The warrior was tall and female. She was bald and had intricate markings on her scalp. Her armor was thin, but it stopped a scything claw that could cut through a tank. Vance wanted to thank her. He stepped forward. The warrior turned her head. She looked at Vance with pity. She reached into a pouch on her belt. She pulled out a small silver disc. She pressed it against Vance's leg. The pain vanished instantly. A cool sensation spread through his limb. The bleeding stopped. The skin knit itself back together. Vance touched the spot. There was no scar. He looked at the medic from his platoon. The medic was holding a rusty saw and a bottle of dirty alcohol. That was how the Imperium treated wounds. They cut off the limb and cauterized the stump. This woman had healed him with a touch. Vance felt tears in his eyes. He did not understand this magic. Inside the command bunker, the air was stale. It smelled of sweat, fear, and old parchment. General Cage stood at the head of the tactical table. His uniform was stained with oil and blood. Opposite him stood King T'Challa. The king had removed his helmet. His face was unlined. He looked healthy. He looked like a man who had never eaten corpse starch in his life. Behind the king stood two of his royal guards. They stood perfectly still. To the right of the general stood Magos Delta 9. The tech priest was agitated. His mechadendrites, the mechanical tentacles on his back, were twitching. He was recording everything. General Cage spoke first. He kept his hand near his bolt pistol. He knew the protocol. Unauthorized contact with unknown civilizations was a crime, but his men were dying. He had to choose between heresy and survival. Cage asked the king who he was and why he was here. T'Challa spoke softly. He said his people were from a planet called Bast. It was a world hidden in a nebula deep in the Segmentum Tempestus. He claimed they were a lost colony of humanity from the dark age of technology. He said they had hidden themselves to survive the horrors of the galaxy. But now, seeing the Tyranids threaten to consume all life, they could no longer hide. Magos Delta 9 made a harsh grinding noise. He stepped forward. He pointed a metal finger at the king's armor. The Magos demanded to know the source of the technology. He said the machine spirits of the armor were silent. He accused the king of using Xenos technology. In the Imperium, using alien technology was a death sentence. It was tech heresy. The Magos said The Omnissiah did not know this metal. Therefore, the metal was evil. T'Challa did not get angry. He had studied the Imperium. He knew they were superstitious and fearful. He knew he had to lie to save them. T'Challa told the Magos that the metal was not alien. He said it was a gift from an ancient saint of terror. He called it Vibranium. He explained that it was a holy mineral found only on their world. He said their ancestors had used an ancient standard template construct to forge it. The mention of a standard template construct changed everything. The Magos stopped twitching. The STC was the holy grail of the Adeptus Mechanicus. They spent thousands of years looking for scraps of these ancient blueprints. If this king possessed a functional STC, he was not a heretic. He was a prophet. The Magos lowered his hand. He said he would need to inspect the STC later. For now, the assistance was accepted. General Cage let out a breath he did not know he was holding. He pointed to the map. The city was surrounded. There were millions of Tyranids. The Imperial Guard had lost 80% of their tanks. They had no air support. The ammunition depots were empty. Cage asked the king what he could do. T'Challa tapped the table. A hologram appeared. It was not the grainy, flickering green light of Imperial displays. It was high definition. It was made of purple light that looked solid. It showed the battlefield in real time. It showed every single Tyranid organism. It showed the heat signatures and the tunnel networks. Cage gasped. He had never seen such tactical clarity. T'Challa pointed to a mountain ridge 10 miles away. He said the Tyranids were digging tunnels there. They were planning to bypass the walls and come up underneath the city. Cage cursed. He had no seismic sensors to detect that. If the Tyranids breached from below, the city would fall in an hour. T'Challa said his ship, the Royal Talon, could deploy sonic stabilizers. These devices would send vibrations into the earth. The vibrations would collapse the tunnels and crush the bugs. But he needed the Imperial Guard to distract the surface swarm. He needed Cage to order a counterattack. Cage looked at the map. A counterattack was suicide. His men were tired. Their guns were broken. But if they did nothing, they died anyway. Cage agreed. He ordered the 812 to fix bayonets. Outside, the mood changed. The presence of the Wakandans gave the soldiers hope. The Wakandans did not just fight. They shared. They passed out small energy bars to the starving troops. The bars were wrapped in gold foil. Trooper Vance opened one. It smelled like fruit and grain. He took a bite. It was sweet. It was rich. He felt energy return to his muscles. For the first time in years, his stomach did not hurt. The soldier next to him, a veteran named Sergeant Halloway, looked at the bar with suspicion. Halloway said it might be poison. He said kindness was a trap, but he ate it anyway. The hunger was too strong. The gates of the Hive City opened. The Imperial Guard marched out. They marched in straight lines. They sang hymns to the Emperor to hide their fear. The Wakandan warriors moved with them. The Wakandans did not march in lines. They moved in packs. They used the terrain. They took cover behind rocks and debris. The Tyranid swarm screeched. A sea of chitin and claws rushed forward. The battle was loud. Laser guns cracked like whips. Heavy bolters thumped like drums. The Wakandan weapons made a strange singing noise. When a Wakandan fired a sonic ring, it did not burn a hole in the enemy. It shattered them. The sound waves matched the frequency of the Tyranid armor. The monsters shook apart. Their shells cracked and their insides turned to jelly. It was clean and efficient. General Cage watched from his tank, the hand of terror. He saw a Wakandan warrior jump onto the back of a huge biovore. The beast was trying to launch acid bombs. The warrior placed a palm on the creature's neck. The suit's gloves glowed. A shockwave went through the beast's spine. The monster fell dead instantly. The warrior backflipped off the carcass and landed softly. Cage shook his head. His tanks were clumsy iron boxes. These people were weapons themselves. But the Tyranids were not mindless animals. They were controlled by a hive mind, a vast alien intelligence that learned from every death. The hive mind saw the sonic weapons. It felt the vibrations in the earth. It understood that the prey had a new trick. The hive mind adjusted. Deep in the swarm, new creatures were born. These were not the mindless gaunts. These were zoanthropes. They were floating sacks of brain matter and psychic power. They were living conduits of the warp. The hive mind directed them to target the Wakandans. The zoanthropes floated over the battlefield. Green lightning crackled around their oversized heads. A beam of psychic energy shot out. It hit a Wakandan warrior. The Vibranium suit was designed to absorb physical hits. It could stop a bullet or a claw, but it was not designed to stop magic. The psychic beam bypassed the metal weave. It cooked the man inside the suit. The warrior fell, smoke rising from his joints. King T'Challa saw this on his display. He frowned. He spoke into his comms. He ordered the Hatutsaratse, the war dogs, to target the floating brains. He ordered the shields to modulate their frequency. The Wakandans adapted fast, but the Tyranids adapted faster. Suddenly, the sky roared. It was not the Wakandan ship. It was a sound every Imperial citizen knew. It was the roar of Thunderhawk gunships. Drop pods streaked through the atmosphere like meteors. They slammed into the earth with the force of bombs. The doors exploded outward. Space Marines emerged. They were giants in yellow armor. The Imperial Fists. They were the Emperor's war builders. They were stubborn and unyielding. They carried bolters the size of anvils. They began firing immediately. Their explosive rounds tore through the Tyranids. Captain Valerius of the Imperial Fists led the charge. He carried a power sword and a storm shield. He smashed a Tyranid warrior aside and looked around. He saw the black-clad warriors. He saw the purple energy barriers. He saw the sleek black ship hovering above. He did not see allies. He saw unknowns. And to a space marine, an unknown was a threat. Valerius opened a Vox channel to General Cage. He demanded to know why there were unregistered combatants on the field. He demanded to know why the general was fighting alongside Xenos. Cage tried to explain. He said they were human. He said they were a lost colony. Valerius did not care. He was a soldier of the Codex Astartes. Rules were absolute. He ordered his squad to secure the area. He marched toward T'Challa. The Wakandan king stood his ground. The space marine towered over him. Valerius was 8 feet of gene-bulked muscle and ceramic plate. T'Challa was a normal man in a suit. Valerius pointed his power sword at T'Challa's chest. The energy field on the sword crackled. He ordered T'Challa to surrender his weapons and submit to judgment. The Wakandan royal guards raised their spears. The space marines raised their bolters. The Tyranids were still attacking, but the two human factions were about to kill each other. General Cage ran from his tank. He put himself between the giant and the king. He begged Valerius to look at the enemy. He pointed to the tunnels that were collapsing due to the sonic stabilizers. He said the city would have fallen without the Wakandans. Valerius paused. He looked at the collapsing tunnels. He looked at the dead Tyranids. He saw the efficiency of the kill. He was a tactical genius. He recognized that the Wakandan tech was superior. This offended him, but he could not deny the reality. The mission was to save the hive. Infighting would cause the mission to fail. Valerius lowered his sword 1 inch. He said they would discuss the heresy later. For now, the Xenos filth had to die. T'Challa nodded. He signaled his guards to lower their spears. The alliance was fragile. It was built on a lie and held together by immediate danger. The battle raged for 3 more hours. The combination of Space Marine brutality and Wakandan precision was devastating. The Imperial Fists held the line like a stone wall. The Wakandans moved through the gaps like water, assassinating the leader beasts. When a Carnifex charged Valerius, T'Challa threw a set of kinetic beads. The beads stuck to the monster's legs and exploded, shattering its knees. Valerius finished the beast with a sword thrust to the heart. The 2 leaders looked at each other over the dead monster. There was no friendship, only cold professional respect. As the sun set, the Tyranids retreated. They did not run away in fear. They pulled back to regroup. They pulled back to digest the dead and create new counters. The battlefield was a mess of grey mud, alien ichor, and broken bodies. Inside the city walls, the logistics of the Alliance began to strain. The Wakandans set up a camp in the main plaza. They deployed modular hab units. These units were clean, bright, and warm. The Imperial citizens gathered around the perimeter. They stared at the Wakandans. They looked at the clean clothes and the healthy skin of the newcomers. They looked at their own rags and felt a deep, aching shame. A young girl, no older than 10, walked up to the barrier. She held a dead rat. It was her dinner. A Wakandan scientist saw her. He came out of the barrier. He gently took the rat from her hand and threw it away. He gave her a nutrient pack. The girl ate it so fast she choked. The scientist patted her back. He looked around at the city. He saw the pollution. He saw the servitors, men and women lobotomized and turned into cyborg slaves. He saw the priest whipping people to work harder. The scientist went to T'Challa's tent. He reported what he saw. He said the Imperium was a nightmare. He said the people were slaves in all but name. He asked why they were saving this system. He asked if it wouldn't be better to let it fall and rebuild it properly. T'Challa sat in his command chair. He looked tired. He had removed his mask. He looked at the holographic map of the galaxy. It was full of red warning lights, orcs, necrons, chaos, Tyranids. Humanity was besieged on all sides. T'Challa told the scientists that they did not have a choice. The hidden system was strong, but it was small. They had 5 planets. The Imperium had 1,000,000 worlds. If the Imperium fell, the wave of darkness would drown Wakanda too. They needed the Imperium to be the shield, so Wakanda could be the spear. They had to save this broken, cruel empire to save themselves. Outside the tent, Magos Delta 9 was working. He was standing over a discarded piece of Wakandan armor. A soldier had died, and the armor was left behind. The Magos did not treat it with respect. He treated it as a specimen. He used a laser cutter to slice into the weave. He wanted to know how it worked. He wanted to know the secret. The laser cutter failed. The Vibranium absorbed the heat. The Magos grew frustrated. He called for a servitor to bring a plasma torch. He was obsessed. He did not care about the war anymore. He only cared about the metal. This obsession was dangerous. The Mechanicus did not share power. If they could not control this technology, they would destroy it. In the orbit above, the Space Marine battle barge Fist of Dawn scanned the Wakandan ship. The ship's sensors could not penetrate the Wakandan cloaking screens. The chapter master of the Imperial Fists was watching from the bridge. He did not trust the report from Captain Valerius. A lost colony with tech better than Mars? It sounded like a trap. The chapter master ordered a message to be sent to the Inquisition. He marked it with the highest priority code, Vermilion level. The message was simple. Potential tech heresy of Omega level detected. Requesting Ordo Hereticus investigation. Quarantine of system recommended. The message went out into the void. It would take weeks to reach the nearest Inquisitor. But once it arrived, The doom of the Alliance would be set in motion. The Inquisition did not negotiate. They burned. Back on the ground, the night was cold. The temperature dropped to freezing. The Imperial Guardsmen huddled together for warmth. They had no heaters. The Wakandans activated thermal nets around their camp. The warm air drifted over the line. The Guardsmen moved closer to the Wakandan camp, drawn by the heat like moths to a flame. General Cage walked the line. He saw his men sleeping near the alien barrier. He did not stop them. He was too tired to enforce discipline. He met T'Challa at the edge of the camp. The king handed him a warm drink in a metal cup. Cage took it. He did not ask what it was. He drank it. It tasted like spices and earth. Cage looked at the king. He asked what happens tomorrow. T'Challa looked at the dark horizon. He said the Tyranids would change. He said the sonic weapons would not work as well next time. The enemy would evolve dampening scales. Cage asked what the plan was then. T'Challa said they would have to give the Imperium better weapons. He said they would have to upgrade the Guard. Cage laughed. It was a dry, cracking sound. He said the Munitorum would take 10 years to approve a new bootlace. They would never approve new guns. T'Challa said they would not ask for permission. He said they would do it because they had to. This was the first real catastrophe. Not the battle. The battle was simple. The catastrophe was the idea. The idea that things could be better. The idea that the Imperium's stagnation was a choice, not a necessity. By giving a starving man a taste of a feast, Wakanda had sown the seeds of rebellion. In the darkness beyond the walls, the hive mind was busy. It had tasted the Vibranium. It had tasted the Space Marine gene seed. It combined the data. In the birthing pools, new shapes were forming. Creatures with thick, shock-absorbing armor plates. Creatures with bones that could vibrate at high frequencies. The Tyranids were not just immune to the new weapons. They were copying them. The next wave would not just be a swarm. It would be a mirror. And the Imperium was about to see its own reflection in the eyes of a monster. Magos Delta 9 finally managed to cut a small piece of the Vibranium weave. He held it up to his optical sensor. He saw the atomic structure. It was perfect. It was too perfect. No human hand could make this. The Magos concluded that the king was lying. This was not an STC. This was something else. Something older. The Magos felt a cold logic settle in his core processor. He would learn the secret, and then he would purge the source. He sent a binary code signal to his fellow tech priests on the nearby Forge world. The message was encrypted. It said, Archaeotech confirmed. Origin suspect. Prepare for acquisition by force. The board was set. The Tyranids were evolving. The Inquisition was summoned. The Mechanicus was plotting theft. And in the middle, a few thousand exhausted soldiers and a hidden kingdom tried to hold back the night. The real war had just begun. The manufactorums of Hive Tertius had not been silent for 3,000 years. They usually roared with the sound of stamping presses and grinding gears. But now, there was a different sound. It was the hum of levitation emitters and the soft chime of holographic displays. Princess Shuri stood on a catwalk overlooking the assembly line. She wore the white ceremonial armor of the Wakandan Science Guild. Below her, hundreds of Imperial Lehman Russ tanks sat in rows. They were old, scarred, and leaking oil. They were relics of a slower, heavier age. Beside the tanks, Wakandan engineers worked alongside the sweat-stained laborers of the Hive. The contrast was painful to look at. The Wakandans moved with purpose and grace. The Hive workers moved like beaten animals, terrified of making a mistake. Magos Delta 9 hovered next to Shuri. His metal feet did not touch the grate. He was watching a Wakandan engineer removed the heavy battle cannon from a tank turret. The engineer was replacing it with a sleek, linear accelerator. The Magos let out a screech of binary static. He pointed a mechadendrite at the engineer. He spoke in a voice that sounded like grinding stones. He said the machine spirit of the tank would be angered. He said the tank was a holy vessel of the Emperor's wrath, and changing its voice was heresy. Shuri tried to be patient. She explained that the kinetic accelerator fired faster, hit harder, and weighed half as much. She said it would save lives. The Magos did not care about lives. He cared about the ritual. He said the proper unguents had not been applied. He said the prayers of ignition had not been chanted. Shuri looked at General Cage. The general sat on a crate nearby, cleaning his bolt pistol. He looked 10 years older than he had 2 days ago. He told the Magos to be quiet. He said, if the tank could kill bugs, he did not care if it prayed or not. The Magos fell silent, but his optical lenses glowed with a dangerous red light. He recorded the heresy. Every bolt removed was a crime against the Omnicia. Every new circuit added was a corruption of the sacred blueprint. The Mechanicus did not forget. They were already compiling a data packet for the Inquisition. They were building a case for exterminatus, the total destruction of the planet, to purge the technological sin. Down on the floor, Trooper Vance held his laser gun. It looked different. The wooden stock was gone, replaced by a lightweight polymer frame. The barrel was wrapped in a thin mesh of vibranium weave. A Wakandan armorer showed him how to use it. The armorer explained that the mesh recycled the heat from the shot. It meant the gun would not overheat. It meant the battery pack would last twice as fast. Vance aimed the weapon at a target dummy. He pulled the trigger. The beam was not the usual red flicker. It was a solid lance of purple light. It punched a hole through the steel plate of the dummy. Vance smiled. For the first time, he felt like a soldier, not just a victim. He felt like he could win. This was the trap. The Wakandans gave the Imperial Guard hope, but hope is dangerous in a galaxy designed to crush it. The soldiers began to look at their commissars differently. They began to whisper, if the Wakandans could fix a gun in 5 minutes, why did the Imperium take 5 centuries? If the Wakandans could heal a wound without a sore, why did the Imperium love scars? The discipline of the regiment was fraying. It was not fraying because of fear. It was fraying because of envy. King T'Challa stood on the wall with Captain Valerius of the Imperial Fists. The Space Marine was cleaning his storm shield. He polished the yellow ceramite until it shone. Valerius did not like the upgrades. He watched the tanks rolling out of the factory with their new cannons. He grunted. He said that a weapon was only as good as the will behind it. He said that making the war easier would make the men softer. T'Challa argued that a dead man has no will. He said that preserving the lives of the soldiers meant they could learn and become veterans. Valerius looked at the king. He said, in the Imperium, lives were the currency. You spent them to buy time. You did not save them. T'Challa looked away. He realized then that he was not just fighting aliens. He was fighting a philosophy of death. The attack came at night. It did not start with a roar. It started with a silence. The sonic stabilizers that the Wakandans had planted in the earth were humming. They were supposed to detect movement and collapse the tunnels, but the sensors remained flat. The screens showed green. The ground was stable. T'Challa frowned. He checked the diagnostics. Everything was working. But his instincts, honed by the Panther god and the experience of his ancestors, told him something was wrong. Then the ground erupted. It did not erupt 10 miles away. It erupted inside the perimeter. The Tyranids had not dug new tunnels. They had used the old sewage networks of the Hive City. They had coated their chitin in a thick, spongy moss. The moss absorbed the sonic waves. It made them invisible to the sensors. The hive mind had learned. It had tasted the sonic technology and evolved a biological countermeasure in less than 48 hours. The pavement of the plaza shattered. Lictors, the assassin beasts of the swarm, leapt out. They were covered in the new grey moss. They moved silently. They did not screech. They struck the Wakandan guards first. A lictor grabbed a Wakandan warrior. The warrior activated his suit's kinetic burst. The purple energy flared. Usually, this would knock the enemy back, but the moss absorbed the energy. The shockwave dissipated into the creature's soft, wet armor. The lictor did not even flinch. It drove its talons through the warrior's chest. Panic spread instantly. The alarm sirens wailed. General Cage ran out of the command bunker. He saw the plaza filling with monsters. He screamed for the tanks. The upgraded Lehman Russ tanks spun their turrets. The new accelerators whined. They fired. The purple beams cut through the darkness. When they hit the Tyranids, the results were mixed. The beams burned the flesh, but they did not cause the explosive trauma of a battle cannon shell. The Tyranids kept coming. They were willing to take the burns to close the distance. Space Marines dropped from the upper levels. Captain Valerius roared orders. The Imperial Fists formed a shield wall. They used their bolters. The explosive rounds blew chunks out of the moss-covered monsters. Valerius realized the tactical shift immediately. The enemy had adapted to energy and sound, but they were still vulnerable to mass reactive explosives. The old ways were working better than the new ways. Valerius contacted T'Challa on the Vox. He shouted that the energy weapons were ineffective against the dampening armor. He told the king to switch to solid projectiles. T'Challa cursed. The Wakandans did not use bullets. They had moved past crude gunpowder centuries ago. Their entire arsenal was based on sonic and directed energy. They were technologically superior, but strategically cornered. Trooper Vance was on the defensive line. He fired his upgraded laser gun. The purple beam hit a gaunt. The creature stumbled but did not die. The moss smoked, but the beast kept running. Vance fired again and again. The gun did not overheat, but it also did not kill fast enough. The gaunt leapt. Vance screamed. He clubbed the monster with the butt of his rifle. The lightweight polymer stock shattered on impact. It was not heavy wood. It was plastic. It broke. Vance fell back, defenseless. A heavy boot stepped on the gaunt's head, crushing it. It was Sergeant Halloway. Halloway held a rusty shotgun. He fired a shell into the next alien. The spread of lead pellets tore the creature's face off. Halloway spat. He looked at Vance's broken high-tech gun. He told the boy to pick up a real weapon. The breach in the plaza grew wider. A Trigon, a massive serpentine beast, slithered out of the hole. It towered over the buildings. Its scything talons were coated in bioplasma. It struck one of the upgraded tanks. The plasma burned through the new Vibranium plating. The tank exploded. The Wakandan metal was strong, but the Tyranid acid was designed to eat molecular bonds. The hive mind had analyzed the Vibranium on a molecular level and brewed a specific acid to dissolve it. Magos Delta Knight watched the tank dissolve. He was safe in the bunker. He did not feel horror. He felt vindication. He recorded the failure. He noted that the unauthorized modification had failed to stop the Xenos. He noted that the machine spirit of the tank had died in shame. The Magos connected his data spike to the city's power grid. He decided it was time to intervene. The Wakandan power generators were synchronized with the city's grid. The Magos initiated a purification protocol. He sent a scrap code virus into the system to isolate the Wakandan tech from the Imperial tech. He did this at the worst possible moment. T'Challa was ordering his heavy support drones to form a barrier. The drones relied on the local grid for recharge cycles. Suddenly, the power cut. The drones dropped out of the air. The holographic displays flickered and died. The lights in the plaza went out. The defenders were plunged into darkness. T'Challa shouted into his comms. He asked what happened. Shuri's voice came back, panicked. She said the Imperial grid had rejected their connection. She said it felt like a cyber attack. T'Challa looked at the bunker. He knew. It was not the enemy outside. It was the ally inside. In the dark, the Tyranids feasted. The screams of the Imperial Guard echoed off the walls. The Wakandans activated their suit lights, casting long, dancing shadows. They formed a circle around the civilians. They fought with spears and shields. They were masters of close combat, but there were too many enemies. The moss armor neutralized their sonic pulses. They had to hack and slash with physical strength. They were tiring. Captain Valerius saw the line collapsing. He made a cold calculation. The plaza was lost. If they stayed, they would be surrounded. He had to fall back to the inner citadel. This meant abandoning the civilians in the outer ring. It meant abandoning the Wakandan heavy equipment. Valerius opened the channel to all Imperial forces. He ordered a retreat to the citadel gate. General Cage heard the order. He looked at the thousands of people huddling behind the Wakandan line. If he retreated, they would die. He hesitated. Valerius grabbed him by the shoulder. The Space Marine's grip was like an iron clamp. He told Cage that a commander does not spend lives he cannot save. He said the city was the priority, not the refugees. Cage looked at Atez. T'Challa. The king was fighting a tyrant guard. He was moving like a blur, dodging blows that would shatter a tank. Cage made his choice. It was the choice of a coward or a realist. He ordered the guard to fall back. The soldiers ran. They left their food, their blankets, and their hope. They ran for the big iron gates of the citadel. Trooper Vance ran too. He threw away the broken Wakandan gun. He grabbed a dropped standard issue laser gun from a dead body. It felt heavy. It felt familiar. It felt real. T'Challa saw the Imperials retreating. He felt a surge of anger. He had come to save them, and they were running. But he could not leave the people. He ordered his war dogs to hold the line. He ordered Shuri to overcharge the central Vibranium emitter. Shuri warned him that it would destroy the emitter. It would cause a feedback loop that would fuse the technology. They would lose their best piece of equipment. T'Challa said to do it. Shuri calibrated the device. It was a tall spire of silver metal. She removed the safety limiters. The spire began to glow blinding white. The hum became a scream. The Tyranids sensed the build-up. They rushed the spire. T'Challa stood in front of it. His suit was scratched and dented. He crossed his arms. "Wakanda forever," he shouted. The spire detonated. It was not a fire explosion. It was a sonic nova. A wave of pure sound blasted outward. It was so loud it made teeth bleed. It was so powerful it shattered the moss armor of the Tyranids. It turned their brains to liquid. The wave cleared the plaza in a second. Thousands of monsters dropped dead. The silence that followed was deafening. But the cost was high. The emitter was a slag of molten metal. The Wakandan suits were drained of power, and the Imperial gate was closed. T'Challa turned to look at the citadel. The massive adamantium doors were sealed. The Imperial Fists stood on the ramparts, bolters aimed down. They were not aiming at the Tyranids. They were aiming at the plaza. They were establishing a kill zone. Valerius spoke over the Vox. He told T'Challa to bring his people to the side gate. He said they would be scanned for infection before being allowed in. He said the civilians had to stay outside. He said they could be infected by Genestealers. He could not risk the citadel. T'Challa looked at the shivering refugees. He looked at the giant metal door. He realized that to the Imperium, compassion was a weakness. To save the few, they would sacrifice the many. This was the logic of the 41st millennium. It was a logic that T'Challa could not accept. He refused. He told Valerius that if the gate did not open for everyone, it would not open for anyone. He said his people would stay outside and fight. Valerius warned him that the next wave would be bigger. He said the sonic nova was a one-time trick. He said T'Challa was choosing suicide. T'Challa did not answer. He signaled his people to set up a perimeter in the ruins. They used pieces of the destroyed buildings. They used the carcasses of the dead Tyranids. They built a wall of bone and stone. The Wakandans were no longer shining knights from the sky. They were grimy, bloody, and desperate. They looked less like gods and more like the Imperial Guard. Inside the citadel, Magos Delta 9 was pleased. The Wakandan tech was destroyed or drained. The threat of innovation was reduced. He turned his attention to the captured data. He had scanned the frequency of the sonic nova. He believed he could replicate it, but only in a weapon sanctioned by Mars. A weapon that killed without mercy and without the weakness of protecting civilians. He began to draft a schematic. He called it the Hymn of Destruction. General Cage sat in the dark of the Citadel command room. He drank his recycled water. It tasted like ash. He looked at the screen showing the Wakandans outside. He felt a deep shame burning in his gut. He had followed orders. He had saved the strategic asset. But he had lost his soul. He looked at his hands. They were shaking again. The hunger was back. The golden energy bars were gone. The hope was gone. In the shadows of the lower hives, something else was happening. The Genestealer Cults, the human hybrid spies of the Tyranids, had been watching. They saw the friction between the allies. They saw the closed gate. They began to whisper to the refugees left outside. They offered a different kind of salvation. They did not offer high-tech guns or golden food. They offered unity. They offered a place in the Star Children's embrace. They whispered that the Imperium had abandoned them, but the four-armed Emperor would welcome them. The refugees were cold, scared, and betrayed. They listened. The seeds of a new enemy were planted right behind T'Challa's back. While he looked outward at the monsters were growing inward. The shiny black paint of the Wakandan armor was chipped, revealing the raw metal underneath. The golden light of the Imperial Fists' armor on the wall looked cold and distant. The alliance was not broken, but it was cracked, and in the cracks, the blood was starting to seep through. The first catastrophe was not the battle. It was the realization that in this universe, being right did not mean you would win, and being good was the fastest way to get killed. The siege of Hive City Tertius entered its third week. The initial roar of battle had faded into a grinding, miserable silence. Outside the citadel walls, the refugees lived in a shantytown built from scrap metal and crushed vehicles. The Wakandans called it Bast's Hope. The Imperial soldiers on the wall called it the Spoil. The weather had turned against them. Acid rain fell from the orange clouds. It hissed when it hit the ground. It ate through cloth and irritated the skin. The Wakandans used their energy shields to create a roof over the refugees, but the generators were failing. The Vibranium cells were running on empty. They could not recharge them because the citadel had cut the power link. King T'Challa walked through the camp. His black armor was dull. The nanites were working slowly to repair deep scratches from Tyranid claws. He saw a mother holding a baby. The baby was crying. T'Challa knelt down. He offered a small heating bead. The mother looked at him with dull, glassy eyes. She did not take the bead. She looked afraid. T'Challa placed the bead on the ground and walked away. He felt a cold knot in his stomach. The people were changing. They were not just hungry. They were secretive. They gathered in small groups and stopped talking when the Wakandans walked by. Inside the citadel, the air was filtered and warm. General Cage stood in the strategy room. The map table was covered in red runes. The Tyranids had surrounded the city completely. They were not attacking. They were waiting. They had cut the supply lines. They had poisoned the water table. Cage looked at the food reports. The citadel had rations for 6 months. The refugees outside had rations for 0 days. Cage looked at Captain Valerius. The Space Marine was standing like a statue. He was in a deep meditative trance, conserving his energy. Cage asked if they should launch a sortie to bring the civilians inside. Valerius opened his eyes. He said no. He said the risk of infection was too high. He said the Tyranids were using the civilians as bait. If the gates opened, the swarm would rush in. Cage slammed his fist on the table. He said they were damning innocent souls. Valerius said they were saving the Emperor's domain. The logic was ironclad. It was also heartless. Deep in the lower levels of the Citadel's manufactorum, Magos Delta 9 was busy. He was not repairing tanks. He was building a monster. He had taken the data from the Wakandan sonic nova and combined it with Imperial seismic mining tech. The result was a massive cannon mounted on a tracked chassis. It looked like a church organ made of gunmetal. He called it the Vox Dominus. It did not use sophisticated frequency modulation like the Wakandan tech. It used brute force. It used enough decibels to liquefy rock. The Magos did not care about the side effects. He only cared about the output. He had his servitors chant the hymn of breaking as they welded the final plates. The machine spirit of the cannon was angry. It rumbled even when it was turned off. The Magos poured sacred oil on the barrel to soothe it. He was ready to test it. He did not ask for permission. The Adeptus Mechanicus answered only to Mars. Outside in the refugee camp, the rot was spreading. It was not a disease of the body, but of the soul. A man named Gorn was leading the whispers. Gorn had been a sewage worker. Now he was a prophet. He wore a heavy cloak to hide his third arm. He had the ridges of a Genestealer hybrid on his forehead, but in the dim light, they looked like scars. He gathered the hungry people around a fire made of burning tires. He told them the Wakandans were liars. He told them the Imperium had abandoned them. He said the only salvation was the Star Children. He pointed to the sky, where the Tyranid hive ships hung like bruised fruit. He said the angels were coming to take them away from the pain. He said they just had to open the door. Shuri was monitoring the camp sensors. She saw the heat signatures of the people huddled together. She saw something else, a strange biological rhythm. The heartbeats of some refugees were syncing up. It was the hive mind response. She ran a diagnostic. The computer flagged it as Xenos contamination. Shuri gasped. She realized the truth. The Genestealers were inside the camp. They were hiding among the people T'Challa was trying to protect. She ran to her brother's tent. T'Challa was sharpening his spear. She showed him the data. T'Challa closed his eyes. This was the nightmare scenario. If he attacked the infected refugees, the uninfected ones would riot. They would see the Wakandans killing civilians. It would be a massacre. But if he did nothing, the infection would spread until everyone was a monster. T'Challa made a decision. It was the hardest decision of his life. He ordered the war dogs to isolate the infected sector. He ordered them to use non-lethal stun nets. He wanted to cure them. He believed Wakandan science could reverse the genetic taint. He was wrong. The Tyranid DNA was not a virus. It was a rewrite of the code of life. Once you were part of the cult, you were gone. The war dogs moved in. They wore stealth cloaks. They surrounded Gorn's sector. But Gorn was waiting. The Genestealers had a psychic link. They knew the Wakandans were coming. Gorn shouted a command in a language that sounded like wet leather tearing. The refugees threw off their cloaks. They pulled out autoguns and mining lasers they had hidden. They opened fire on the Wakandans. The stun nets failed. The Wakandans were forced to switch to lethal force. Purple spears flashed. Bodies fell. The camp erupted into chaos. The uninfected refugees panicked. They saw the angels killing their neighbors. They joined the fight against the Wakandans. They threw rocks and metal pipes. T'Challa stood in the middle of the riot. He grabbed a man who was trying to stab him with a screwdriver. He looked into the man's eyes. They were human eyes. The man was not infected. He was just scared. T'Challa threw him aside gently. "Stop," the king roared. His voice was amplified by his suit. "We are trying to help you." But fear is louder than any speaker. The mob pushed forward. The Wakandans formed a circle, shields locked. They were being overwhelmed by the very people they had sworn to save. At that moment, the ground shook. It was not an earthquake. It was the Vox Dominus. Margos Delta 9 had fired his weapon. He aimed it at the Tyranid swarm gathering on the ridge. The cannon roared. A beam of distorted sound slammed into the ridge. It worked. The rock shattered. Thousands of Tyranids were crushed. But the Magos had not calculated the resonance frequency of the citadel itself. The citadel was built on the same bedrock as the ridge. The shockwave traveled back through the stone. The foundations of the citadel groaned, concrete cracked. The massive adamantium gates twisted in their frame. The seal was broken. The Tyranid hive mind felt the vibration. It felt the weakness. It saw the gate buckle. It ignored the losses on the ridge. It directed every living organism toward the gate. The swarm moved like a liquid. They ran over the refugee camp. They did not eat the refugees yet. They used them as cover. The refugees were caught between the Tyranids and the Wakandans. It was a slaughter. General Cage watched the gate twist on his monitor. He screamed for the tech priest to stop. But the Magos was in a religious ecstasy. He fired again. The second shot was even stronger. The gate hinges snapped. The doors fell inward with a crash that shook the teeth of everyone in the city. The breach was open. Captain Valerius did not panic. He simply reloaded his bolter. "Form ranks," he said. The Imperial Fists marched to the breach. They stood in a solid yellow line. Behind them, the Imperial Guard formed a second line. Cage ordered his tanks to fire at will. Outside, T'Challa saw the gate fall. He saw the Tyranids rushing past his camp to get inside. He had a choice. He could retreat into the wastelands and leave the Imperium to die. They deserved it. They had locked him out. They had fired the weapon that broke the gate. But T'Challa was a king, and a king does not act out of spite. He ordered his people to charge. They charged into the swarm. They hit the Tyranids from behind. It was a suicide mission. They were trying to buy the Imperium time to plug the breach. The battle at the gate was a meat grinder. The Imperial Fists fired explosive bolts that turned the front row of Tyranids into mist. The Wakandans used their sonic spears to cut the legs off the larger beasts, but the pressure was too great. A Carnifex, a living battering ram, smashed into the Imperial Fists line. It knocked 3 Space Marines into the air. One of them, Brother Alaric, landed near T'Challa. Alaric's leg was crushed. He tried to stand but couldn't. A Genestealer leapt at him. T'Challa threw his spear. It pinned the alien to the wall. T'Challa offered his hand to the Space Marine. Alaric looked at the Xanos hand. He hesitated. Then he took it. T'Challa pulled him up. "Fight," T'Challa said. "For Terra," Alaric grunted. "For Bast," T'Challa replied. The alliance was forged again, in blood. But it was too late for tactics. It was a brawl. Inside the command center, the lights flickered red. The power grid was fluctuating. The Vox Dominus was drawing too much energy. The machine spirit was screaming. Magos Delta 9 prepared to fire a third time. He believed one more shot would collapse the ridge completely and bury the swarm. He did not care that the citadel walls were cracking. He was obsessed with the data. He initiated the firing sequence. Shuri, fighting near the gate, detected the energy buildup. "He's going to fire again," she screamed over the comms. "If he does, the whole wall comes down." T'Challa heard her. He looked at the massive cannon on the upper tier of the citadel. He looked at Valerius. "Stop your priest," T'Challa shouted. Valerius looked up. He saw the cannon glowing unstable blue. He realized the danger. He tried to hail the Magos. "Cease fire. You are compromising the integrity of the defense." The Magos did not answer. He had turned off his audio receptors. He was listening only to the song of the machine. Valerius cursed. He aimed his bolter at the cannon, but he could not fire. To destroy a holy machine of the Mechanicus was a sin that would get his entire chapter investigated. He hesitated. T'Challa did not hesitate. He activated his suit's overload capacity. The purple lines on his armor glowed white. He sprinted. He ran up the falling debris of the gate. He jumped over the heads of the fighting soldiers. He climbed the wall with the speed of a leopard. He reached the upper tier. The Magos saw him. The Magos deployed his mecha dendrites. They were tipped with plasma cutters. "Halt, Xenos filth," the Magos droned. "Do not touch the sacred engine." T'Challa dodged a plasma strike. He did not want to kill the tech priest. He wanted to stop the gun. He threw a magnetic suppression disc. It clamped onto the barrel of the cannon. The disc scrambled the targeting logic. The cannon misfired. The energy backwashed. The barrel exploded. The explosion blew the Magos backward. It shattered the glass of the command deck. It sent a shockwave through the citadel. But the wall did not fall. T'Challa had saved the city from its own weapon. He stood over the smoking wreckage. The Magos was writhing on the ground, leaking oil. You broke it," the Magos stuttered. "You broke the hymn." "I saved your life," T'Challa said cold. Down below, the distraction had cost them. While everyone looked at the explosion, the Genestealer Cultists had made their move. They were not fighting the Tyranids. They were fighting the guardsmen. They had infiltrated the rear lines. Gorn, the prophet, had led a team into the generator room. They planted mining charges on the main fusion core. They wanted to blow the citadel sky high. They wanted to offer the city as a burnt offering to the Star Children. General Cage saw the security alert. "Breach in the core," he yelled. "They're going to blow the reactor." This was the strategic chain reaction. The refusal to help the refugees had allowed the cult to grow. The cult had sabotaged the defense. The defense had forced the Magos to use a dangerous weapon. The weapon had broken the gate. And now, the enemy was inside the heart of the city. Trooper Vance was in the hallway leading to the core. He was alone. His squad was dead. He held his standard laser gun. He saw the cultists running toward the reactor door. They were screaming praises to the alien gods. Vance was tired. He was hungry. He was terrified. But he remembered the taste of the golden bar the Wakandan gave him. He remembered the feeling of hope. He realized that if he ran, that hope died forever. Vance stepped out from behind a crate. He leveled his gun. "Not today," he whispered. He fired. The laser hit the lead cultist in the chest. The cultist fell. The others turned. They had 3 arms. They had sharp teeth. They charged. Vance fired again and again. He killed 2 more, but there were too many. They reached him. Claws tore at his flak armor. Vance fell. As he died, he pulled the pin on his fragmentation grenade. He did not throw it. He held it to his chest. "For the Emperor," he choked out. The explosion collapsed the hallway. It buried the cultists. It sealed the path to the reactor. Trooper Vance, a nobody from a hive world, had saved the city. But the battle was far from over. The Tyranids were pouring through the gate. The Wakandans and the Imperial Fists were fighting back to back in a circle of death. The dead bodies were piling up so high they formed a ramp. T'Challa jumped down from the wall. He landed next to Valerius. The Space Marine was covered in ichor. His shield was broken. He was fighting with a combat knife the size of a sword. "The reactor is safe," T'Challa said, "but we are losing the gate." Valerius nodded. "We need to collapse the archway, seal the breach permanently." "That will trap us inside," T'Challa said, "and it will trap my ship outside." "If we do not," Valerius said, "the city falls. The planet falls." T'Challa looked at the Royal Talon hovering in the distance. It was fighting off a swarm of gargoyles. If he sealed the gate, he cut off his escape. He cut off his supply line. He would be trapped in this dying city with people who hated him. "Do it," T'Challa said. Valerius contacted the Fist of Dawn in orbit. He gave the coordinates. "Orbital bombardment. Danger close. Target the main gate arch." "Acknowledged," came the voice of the chapter master. The sky split open. A lance of pure light from the battle barge struck the earth. It hit the top of the citadel gate. The stone vaporized. The massive arch collapsed. Thousands of tons of rock fell onto the breach. It crushed the Tyranids. It crushed the Wakandan dead. It crushed the Imperial dead. It sealed the hole with a mountain of rubble. Dust covered the city. The noise stopped. The Tyranids outside screeched in frustration, but they could not get in. The immediate threat was gone. Inside the courtyard, the survivors looked at each other. There were only a few hundred Wakandans left. The Imperial Guard was decimated. The Space Marines had lost 2 squads. General Cage walked out of the bunker. He looked at the sealed gate. He looked at T'Challa. He did not say thank you. He looked at the smoking ruins of the cannon. He looked at the bodies of the refugees who had turned traitor. "We are alive," Cage said. "Are we?" T'Challa asked. He pointed to the shadows. In the corners of the courtyard, the surviving civilians were watching. They were not cheering. They were whispering. They saw the orbital strike. They saw the Imperium bomb its own gate. They saw the Wakandans as the reason for the escalation. The seeds of the Genestealer cult were not all destroyed with Gorn. The idea had survived. The idea that the Imperium was the enemy. And in the darkness of the reactor room, a single Genestealer hybrid crawled out of the rubble of the hallway where Vance had died. It was wounded, but alive. It scurried into the ventilation shafts. It carried a canister of the Promethium fuel Vance had tried to protect. It had a new mission. If it couldn't blow the reactor, it would poison the air scrubbers. The strategic chain reaction was not over. It had just moved from the battlefield to the bloodstream of the city. The Tyranids outside were the hammer. The cult inside was the virus. And the Wakandans and Imperials were trapped in the box together, bleeding, mistrustful, and running out of time. Magos Delta 9 lay in the infirmary. Half his body was rebuilt with spare parts. He was writing a message to the High Lords of Terror. He was not reporting the victory. He was reporting the threat. "The Xenos technology is too dangerous," he wrote. "The king named T'Challa has humiliated the priesthood of Mars. He must be eliminated. His technology must be seized. Initiate protocol. Assassin." T'Challa is sitting on a piece of broken wall. He held his helmet in his hands. He looked at the Vibranium weave. It was dull and grey. The living metal was dying. It needed to be recharged, but there was no source. He was a king without a kingdom, a soldier without a war, trapped in a cage with a wounded animal that wanted to bite him. The catastrophe was total. The rescue mission had become a prison sentence, and in the deep dark, the hive mind began to spawn something new, something designed not to break walls, but to break minds. The air in the citadel did not taste like air anymore. It tasted like copper and old blood. 3 weeks had passed since the Great Gate was sealed by the orbital strike. The citadel of Hive Tertius was no longer a fortress. It was a coffin. The thousands of survivors were trapped in the lower levels. The ventilation systems were groaning. They were clogged with the dust of the collapsed mountain and the spores of the Tyranids. General Cage sat on the floor of the main hallway. He was scrubbing his boots. There was no mud on them, only dust. He scrubbed because if he stopped, he would have to think about the food. The rations were gone. The soldiers were boiling leather belts to make soup. They were hunting the rats that lived in the walls. But even the rats were getting scarce. King T'Challa walked down the line of wounded. His suit was dead. The purple lights were gone. The vibranium was just grey metal now. It was heavy. Every step took effort. Without the power assist, the suit weighed as much as a knight's plate. T'Challa did not take it off. It was the only thing protecting him from the radiation leaking from the damaged reactor core. He stopped by a young Wakandan warrior named Zuri. Zuri had lost an arm in the battle at the gate. The wound was not healing. The Imperial medical supplies were crude. They burned the flesh to seal it. Zuri was feverish. He looked at his king. He asked if they were going home. T'Challa lied. He said yes. He said the royal talon would break through the storm soon. But T'Challa knew the truth. The ship was silent. The interference from the Tyranid hive mind, the shadow in the warp, was blocking all communications. They were alone. Deep in the ventilation shafts, the creature that used to be a man crawled. It was the survivor of the Genestealer cult. It had 3 arms and skin that turned color to match the pipes. It carried the canister of promethium. It had found the central air mixing chamber. This was the heart of the city's lungs. The creature did not want to blow it up. That was the old plan. The hive mind had sent a new thought. The hive mind knew the defenders were starving and weak. It wanted to break them from the inside. The creature opened the canister. It did not pour out fuel. It vomited into the canister. It filled the fuel with biospores it had grown in its own throat. Then it poured the mixture into the water recycler that fed the humidifiers. The spores floated into the system. They were microscopic. They would be breathed in by every man, woman, and child in the citadel. In the strategium, the mood was toxic. Captain Valerius of the Imperial Fists stood by the hololith. The table was dark to save power. Valerius looked at Magos Delta 9. The tech priest was busy wiring a bypass into the wall. The Magos had survived the explosion of his cannon, but he was damaged. Half his face was missing, replaced by a bundle of optic cables. He was more machine than ever. He was obsessed with the Wakandans. He calculated that their refusal to share technology was the cause of the stalemate. If he had their power source, he could reactivate the void shields. If he had their sonic tech, he could clear the rubble. General Cage walked in. He looked pale. He coughed. A small speck of blood landed on the table. Valerius looked at it. He did not show concern. He showed analysis. The air quality was dropping to critical levels. The CO2 scrubbers were failing. Valerius spoke. He said the mortals would be dead in 3 days from asphyxiation. The Space Marines could survive for weeks in their sealed armor. The Wakandans might survive longer because of their physiology. But the army The thousands of guns holding the corridors would die. T'Challa entered the room. He heard the assessment. He looked at the Magos. He asked if the Mechanicus could fix the scrubbers. The Magos made a static noise. He said the machine spirit of the ventilation system was dying. It needed a jump start. It needed a high-frequency energy pulse to clear the filters. The Citadel's reactor was too unstable to provide that specific frequency. The Magos pointed a metal finger at T'Challa's chest. He pointed at the heart of the suit, the Vibranium interaction node. The Magos proposed a trade. He said, if T'Challa connected his suit's core processor to the Citadel's mainframe, they could siphon the residual energy from the Wakandan suits. They could use the unique frequency of the Vibranium to purge the filters. It would clean the air. It would save the general and his men. But the cost was total. It would drain the Wakandan suits to zero. It would wipe their operating systems. It would turn their armor into useless scrap metal. They would be defenseless. T'Challa looked at Valerius. He asked if the captain agreed with this. Valerius nodded. He said it was a tactical necessity. The lives of the guardsmen were the only asset they had left. Without the guard, the Space Marines would be overrun by sheer numbers if the Tyranids broke in. T'Challa looked at Cage. The general was trying to hide his breathing difficulty. He was gasping like a fish on land. This was the small choice. It seemed technical. Connect a wire, share a battery. But it was a choice between defense and empathy. If T'Challa refused, he kept his armor active for a few more days, but the humans died. If he agreed, he saved the humans, but he made himself vulnerable to the very people who wanted to steal his secrets. T'Challa thought of his father. He thought of the duty of a king. A king protects those who cannot protect themselves, even if they are strangers, even if they are ungrateful. T'Challa unclipped his helmet. He placed it on the table. He told the Magos to prepare the interface. The Magos did not smile. He could not smile. But his internal logic coils tightened. This was what he wanted. He did not just want the power. He wanted the access code. Once T'Challa plugged in, the Magos could copy the subroutines of the Vibranium weave. He could steal the secret of the metal. The procedure took place in the main engineering bay. The Wakandan warriors gathered. They looked worried. Shuri was there. She touched her brother's arm. She whispered that this was a mistake. She said the Magos was a snake. T'Challa held her hand. He said they had to trust someone, or they were already dead. He stepped onto the platform. The Magos attached thick cables to the interface ports on T'Challa's suit. Initiating transfer, the Magos droned. A hum filled the room. It started low and went high. The purple lights on T'Challa's suit flickered one last time. They flared bright, blindingly beautiful in the dark, grimy room. Then the light rushed out of the suit and into the cables. The lights on the other Wakandan suits in the room also died as the network shared the drain. The Citadel's lights flickered on. The ventilation fans roared to life. A blast of fresh air came out of the vents. The Imperial guardsmen in the hallways cheered. They took deep breaths. They laughed. General K felt the headache vanish. He looked at T'Challa with gratitude. He stepped forward to shake the king's hand. But the air was not clean. The fans were pushing air, yes, but they were also pushing the spores that the creature had put in the water. The high-velocity fans aerosolized the mixture. The fresh air was a delivery system. The spores were microscopic Tyranid organisms. They entered the lungs of the soldiers. They entered the blood. They traveled to the brain. It started with a nosebleed. Trooper Vance's replacement, a boy named Jackson, wiped his nose. It was red. Then it was black. Then his eyes turned yellow. He dropped his laser gun. He fell to his knees. He started to scream. But it was not a scream of pain. It was a scream of alien joy. In the engineering bay, the transfer finished. T'Challa sagged. His suit was dead. He tried to move, but the servos were locked. He was trapped in a metal cage. He asked the Magos to release the clamps. The Magos did not move. He was staring at a data slate. Green code was scrolling across it. He had done it. He had the schematic for the Vibranium energy matrix. He had the holy grail of technology. "Release me," T'Challa commanded. His voice was muffled without the suit's speakers. "Negative," the Magos said. "Subject is required for further study. The biological interface is unique." Valeria stepped forward. "Magos, the deal was for the power. Release the king." The Magos turned his optic sensors to the Space Marine. "The deal is altered. The Xenos tech is now property of the Adeptus Mechanicus. The subject is a heretic carrier. He must be processed." Valerius put his hand on his bolt pistol. "He is an ally. Stand down." The Magos emitted a binary screech. The servitors in the room, mindless cyborg slaves, raised their heavy bolters. They aimed at the Space Marines. They aimed at the unarmed Wakandans. The Magos had overridden their combat protocols. "You dare threaten a son of Dawn," Valerius growled. "I prioritize the acquisition of knowledge," the Magos said. "The flesh is weak. The data is eternal." Suddenly, the screaming started outside. It was not one voice. It was thousands. The doors to the engineering bay burst open. But it was not Tyranids. It was the Imperial Guard. But they were wrong. Their faces were twisted. Their veins bulged black under their skin. They were clawing at their own eyes. The spores had taken hold. It was not a full Genestealer infection. That took generations. This was a rapid onset psychotropic madness. The spores connected the humans to the hive mind for just a second. The human brain cannot handle the hive mind. It broke them. They became rabid animals. Jackson, the boy, ran at General Cage. He bit the general's neck. Cage shouted and fired his pistol. The shot blew the boy away. But 3 more soldiers jumped on Cage. They tore at his uniform. They were eating him. "Defend the perimeter," Valerius roared. The Space Marines opened fire. Their bolts tore through the maddened soldiers. It was a massacre. The protectors were killing the protected. T'Challa was still clamped to the machine. He struggled. He used his own physical strength, the strength of the Black Panther, to fight the dead weight of the suit. "Shuri," he yelled. Shuri was fighting a servitor. She used a metal pipe. She was fast, but the servitor was made of iron. It backhanded her. She flew across the room and hit the wall. She did not get up. T'Challa roared. It was a primal sound. He snapped the locking clamps on his wrists. The metal tore. He ripped the cables from his chest. Sparks showered him. He was free, but he was powerless. He ran to Shuri. She was breathing, but barely. He looked at the chaos. The Space Marines were holding the door against a tide of insane soldiers. The Magos was trying to disconnect his data slate and flee. T'Challa looked at the Magos. The king picked up a heavy wrench from the floor. He did not throw it. He charged. The weight of his armor made him slow, but his momentum was like a freight train. The Magos saw him coming. He fired a plasma pistol. The shot hit T'Challa's chest plate. The Vibranium was dead. It did not absorb the energy. The plasma burned through. It seared T'Challa's skin. T'Challa did not stop. He ignored the pain. He swung the wrench. It hit the Magos in the face. Lenses shattered. Metal crunched. The Magos fell. T'Challa stood over him. He raised the wrench to finish him. "Wait!" Valerius shouted. He kicked a madman away and looked at T'Challa. "We need him. He controls the blast doors." T'Challa looked at the Magos. He looked at Shuri. He looked at the dying General Cage. The choice he made to give power to save lives, had resulted in this. The air was poison. The allies were enemies. The tech was stolen. He does not control anything, T'Challa said. He reached down and ripped the data slate from the Magos' interface. He crushed it in his hand. The stolen data was gone. The Magos shrieked. It was the sound of a man losing his religion. The madness in the hallway was spreading. The spores were circulating through the whole citadel. Only the Space Marines, with their sealed helms, and the Wakandans, with their superior immune systems, were resisting the immediate madness. But the Wakandans were getting sick. The spores were fighting their white blood cells. They were weakening. General Cage lay on the floor. He was bleeding from a dozen bites. His eyes were clear for a moment. He looked at Valerius. "Do it," Cage wheezed. "Purge the section." Valerius looked at the general. He looked at the hundreds of infected soldiers trying to claw into the room. He knew the protocol. If a unit is compromised by warp taint or Xenos infection, it is purged. "Forgive me," Valerius whispered. He tapped his comms. "Squads Tertius and Quarto. Execute protocol cleansing fire. Flame units authorized." The Space Marines at the door stepped back. 2 battle brothers with heavy flamers stepped forward. They pulled the triggers. Promethium fire washed over the hallway. It burned the infected soldiers. It burned the spores. It burned the general. The screams were terrible. T'Challa watched. He felt a deep, hollow horror. This was the Imperium. To save the soul, they burned the body. To stop the sickness, they killed the patient. The fire sealed the door. The engineering bay was safe for a moment, but they were trapped. The ventilation system was now pumping smoke and burning meat smell. Then the ground shook. This time, it was not a cannon. It was something under the floor. The Tyranids had sensed the chaos. They sensed the madness. The hive mind knew the defenders were broken. The digging beasts, the Trigons, had finished their work. The floor of the engineering bay erupted. Concrete slabs the size of cars flew into the air. A Morlock, a giant worm beast with a mouthful of razor teeth, burst from the ground. It swallowed a servitor whole. Valerius spun around. "Contact rear." The Wakandans were exhausted. Their spears were just sharp sticks now without power. T'Challa grabbed a discarded chainsword from a dead commissar. He revved it. The motor coughed and roared. It was a crude, brutal weapon. It shook his arm. It was not elegant like a spear. It was a butcher's tool. "Wakanda forever," T'Challa yelled. But his voice was tired. He charged the worm. Valerius charged with him. The king and the captain. The panther and the fist. They hacked at the beast. The chainsaw tore into the alien flesh, spraying acid blood. Valerius smashed the creature's skull with his thunderhammer. The beast died, but the hole it made was open, and out of the hole came the lictors, and the Genestealers, and the warriors. They were inside. The walls didn't matter anymore. The gate didn't matter. The enemy was in the room. T'Challa looked at Valerius. "We cannot hold this." Valerius looked at the tactical display on his retina. The entire citadel was red. The infection had taken the barracks. The Tyranids had taken the basement. They were squeezed into the engineering bay. "We have one option," Valerius said. "The reactor core is behind this wall. If we overload it, we vaporize the citadel. We deny the biomass to the enemy." "Suicide?" T'Challa asked. "Victory," Valerius corrected. "In death, duty ends." T'Challa looked at Shuri. She was awake now, holding her head. She looked at him. She knew what they were saying. "No," Shuri said. She stood up. She staggered to a console. "There is another way." She pointed to the atmospheric sensors. "The storm outside. It is breaking." The orbital strike cleared the cloud cover for a moment. "The Royal Talon. I can hear it. The signal is coming through. T'Challa tapped his ear. He heard it. Static. Then a voice. A Wakandan pilot. My king, we have a window, but we cannot land. The ground is too unstable. You must get to the roof. We can extract you via tractor beam. The roof was 50 floors up, through corridors filled with fire, smoke, madmen, and monsters. T'Challa looked at Valerius. My ship is above. We can lift your squad out. Valerius shook his head. I cannot leave the city while the enemy lives. The city is dead, Captain. T'Challa grabbed the Space Marine's shoulder. The general is dead. The people are dead. If you stay, you are just meat for the swarm. Come with us. Fight another day. Valerius looked at the burning door. He looked at his dead brothers. He looked at the Magos, who was trying to crawl into a vent to hide. The Space Marine made a calculation. The Codex Astartes supported retreat in the face of total annihilation if the gene seed could be saved. He was the carrier of the gene seed for his fallen brothers. To the roof, Valerius said. They gathered the survivors. 10 Wakandans, 5 Space Marines, 1 wounded, Magos dragged by the collar. They moved to the service elevator. It was broken. They had to take the stairs. 50 floors. As they began to climb, the lights went out for good. The reactor was failing. In the darkness, the chittering of the Tyranids grew louder. They were hunting. This was the massive outcome. The small choice to connect the power had killed the army, poisoned the air, powered down the Wakandan weapons, and let the enemy in. Now, the Grand Alliance was reduced to a running battle up a dark stairwell, chased by the devil itself. T'Challa led the way. He swung the chainsword. He hated the noise. He hated the mess. But he understood now. In this galaxy, you do not fight with clean hands. You fight with what you have. And right now, all he had was rage and a motor with teeth. They climbed. And from the darkness below, the Swarmlord began to ascend after them. The ultimate predator had arrived to finish the game. The stairwell of the central spire was narrow and dark. It wound upward like the throat of a giant stone beast. The air was hot and smelled of burning plastic and old sweat. T'Challa led the group. He held the heavy Imperial chainsword in both hands. The motor growled low and steady. His arms ached. The Vibranium suit was dead weight. Every step was a lift. Behind him came Shuri. She was carrying a las pistol she had taken from a dead soldier. She looked small and tired. Behind her were the 5 surviving Space Marines of the Imperial Fists. They moved with heavy, clanking steps. Their yellow armor was black with soot and slashed by claws. At the rear, 2 Wakandan war dogs dragged Magos Delta 9. The tech priest was missing his legs. Sparks showered from his waist. He was not screaming. He was muttering binary prayers to the machine god. He was trying to calculate the odds of survival. The number was very low. They were on the 20th floor. They had 30 more to go. The sounds from below were getting louder. It was a clicking, skittering sound, like a million dry leaves blowing over pavement. But it was not leaves. It was claws. The Tyranid swarm was filling the stairwell behind them. The aliens could climb the walls and ceilings. They were faster than the humans. T'Challa stopped at a landing to catch his breath. He looked at Captain Valerius. The Space Marine had taken off his helmet. His face was scarred and grey. He had a deep gash on his forehead. He did not wipe the blood away. Valerius checked his bolt pistol. He had 1 magazine left. He looked at T'Challa. He did not show fear. He showed annoyance. To a Space Marine, fatigue was an insult. They heard a scream from below. It was a wet, tearing sound. Then silence. The rear guard was gone. The Tyranids were close. T'Challa revved the chainsword. The teeth spun into a blur. He kicked the door open to the 21st floor. It was an office level. Rows of cogitator banks and desks stretched out in the gloom. The windows were smashed. Rain blew in. It was acid rain. It sizzled on the floor. T'Challa pointed to the far side of the room. There was another stairwell there, a service access. It might be clear. They ran. They had to step over the bodies of scribes and servitors who had died when the air turned to poison. The bodies were bloated. Shuri covered her mouth. She had seen death before, but not like this. Not this mass of hopeless waste. Suddenly, the ceiling panels exploded downward. Genestealers dropped into the room. They were the elite shock troops of the Hive. They had 4 arms and claws that could cut diamond. They did not roar. They hissed. Valerius reacted instantly. He fired his pistol. The mass-reactive shell hit a Genestealer in mid-air. The alien exploded in a shower of purple gore. "Form defensive circle," Valerius shouted. The Space Marines formed a ring around Shuri and the Magos. They drew combat knives. They were out of ammo. T'Challa was outside the ring. A Genestealer lunged at him. T'Challa swung the chainsword. He did not use finesse. He used brute force. The chainsword bit into the alien's shoulder. The teeth chewed through chitin and bone. The alien shrieked and slashed at T'Challa. The claws raked across his chestplate. The dead Vibranium held, but the impact cracked a rib. T'Challa grunted. He pushed the sword deeper. The alien died. Another one came, and another. It was a brawl. There was no room for tactics. It was just hacking and stabbing. A Space Marine named Brother Corvus was pulled down. 3 Genestealers ripped his helmet off. T'Challa saw it happen. He wanted to help, but he was fighting 3 of his own. He kicked one alien into a desk. He sawed the head off another. Shuri was firing her pistol. She was a scientist, not a soldier, but she was a child of Wakanda. She did not miss. She shot a Genestealer in the eye. It fell at her feet. "Move," Valerius bellowed. He smashed a Genestealer's skull with his armored fist. To the stairs. They fought their way across the room. It took 5 minutes. It felt like 5 years. When they reached the service door, Brother Corvus was dead. Another Space Marine was limping. The Wakandan war dogs were bleeding. T'Challa was gasping for air. His suit felt like a coffin. They slammed the heavy blast door and locked it. They heard the aliens scratching on the other side. They began to climb again. The service stairwell was tighter. It was meant for maintenance crews, not giants in armor. The Space Marines scraped their shoulders on the walls. The heat was rising. The reactor fire below was turning the spire into a chimney. Magos Delta 9 spoke. His voice box was damaged. It crackled. He said the heat was damaging his memory banks. He demanded to be carried faster. Valerius looked at the Magos. For a second, T'Challa thought the captain would throw the machine man down the stairs, but Valerius just nodded to the war dogs. "Carry the burden," he said. The Space Marines respected the hierarchy. The tech priest was a holy vessel of knowledge. He had to be saved. They reached the 45th floor. 5 floors left. The roof was close. T'Challa could hear the thunder of the storm outside. He tapped his comms bead. "Royal Talon, this is T'Challa. We are approaching the extraction zone." The voice that came back was broken by static. "My king, the storm, heavy turbulence, sensors are blind. We will attempt descent." Then a new sound came from below. It was not the scratching of claws. It was a heavy, rhythmic thud. It shook the stairs. It felt like a pile driver hitting the foundation. Valerius stopped. His face went pale. Space Marines did not feel fear, but they felt recognition. He knew that sound. It was the footstep of a tyrant. "The Swarmlord," Valerius whispered. T'Challa asked what that was. Valerius explained. The Swarmlord was not just a beast. It was the supreme commander of the Tyranid race. It was older than the Imperium. It had destroyed empires. It was stronger than a tank and smarter than a general. And it was coming for them. We cannot outrun it, Valerius said. It knows we are here. It can smell our fear. It can taste our minds. T'Challa looked to the stairs. Then we must reach the roof before it catches us. They ran. Their lungs burned. Their legs shook. They burst onto the 50th floor. The door to the roof was in front of them. It was a massive steel bulkhead. It was sealed. Shuri ran to the control panel. She ripped the cover off. "It's mag-locked," she yelled. "The city's lockdown protocol is still active." "Open it," T'Challa said. He turned to face the stairs. The heavy footsteps were getting louder. Thud, thud, thud. Shuri pulled wires. She tried to hotwire the lock. "I need power," she screamed. "My tools are dead." Magos Delta 9 dragged himself forward. He extended a mechadendrite. "I have residual charge," he rasped. "Connect me." Shuri plugged the Magos into the door. The tech priest convulsed. He drained his own life support battery to power the lock. The light turned green. The bolts retracted. The heavy door groaned open. Wind and rain hit them like a hammer. The roof was a flat expanse of grey concrete, slick with oil and water. The sky was black, lit by flashes of green lightning. The wind howled. In the sky above, a dark shape hovered. The Royal Talon. It was fighting the gale. Its engines flared purple. It was trying to lower a ramp, but the wind was tossing it like a leaf. "Get to the ship," T'Challa yelled. They ran across the roof. The rain stung their skin. The ship was 50 meters away. It was hovering 10 feet off the deck. It was too unstable to land. Suddenly, the stairwell door behind them exploded. It flew off its hinges and sailed across the roof. The Swarmlord stepped out. It was a nightmare made of bone and muscle. It stood 12 feet tall. It had 4 arms. In each hand it held a sword made of crystalline bone. The swords crackled with psychic energy. Its skin was chitinous plate, thick and scarred. Its eyes were burning yellow coals. It looked at them. It did not roar. It studied them. It was assessing the prey. Valerius stopped running. He turned around. He looked at his surviving brothers. "Go," he ordered. "Get the civilians to the ship." "Captain?" one of the Marines asked. "I said go," Valerius roared. "I will hold the line." The Space Marines obeyed. They grabbed Shuri and the Magos and ran for the ship. T'Challa did not run. He stopped next to Valerius. He held his chainsword. "You cannot fight this," Valerius said without looking at him. "It will kill you in 3 seconds." "I am a king," T'Challa said. "I do not run." "You are a fool," Valerius said. But there was a hint of respect in his voice. The Swarmlord charged. It moved faster than anything that size should move. It was a blur. Valerius raised his combat knife. It looked like a toothpick against the bone sabers. The Swarmlord struck. The first blow shattered Valerius's shoulder guard. The second blow cut his leg. The third blow knocked him across the roof. Valerius hit a vent stack and slumped down. He was broken. T'Challa screamed and charged. He swung the chainsword at the monster's knee. The Swarmlord parried the blow with casual ease. One of its swords flicked out. It cut the chainsword in half. The motor died. T'Challa held a useless handle. The Swarmlord backhanded T'Challa. The blow hit him in the chest. If he had not been wearing the Vibranium suit, he would have been turned to paste. Even with the suit, the force broke ribs and sent him flying. He landed near the edge of the roof. He tasted blood. He could not breathe. The Swarmlord walked toward him. It raised 2 swords to finish him. Suddenly, a bolt of purple plasma hit the Swarmlord in the back. The monster roared and turned. Nainsind. Shuri was standing on the ramp of the Royal Talon. She was holding a heavy Wakandan cannon. She had connected it to the ship's power. "Get away from him," she screamed. She fired again. The shot burned the Swarmlord's armor, but it did not kill it. The monster shrieked psychically. A wave of mental pain hit everyone. Shuri fell to her knees, clutching her head. The pilot of the ship lost control. The Royal Talon dipped dangerously. T'Challa looked up. He saw Valerius trying to stand. The Space Marine was missing an arm. He was bleeding out, but he was standing. In his remaining hand, he held a bundle of grenades. They were crack grenades designed to crack tank armor. Valerius looked at T'Challa. "King," he coughed. "The galaxy is not for the kind." Valerius pulled the pins with his teeth. He did not throw the grenades. He ran. He ran straight at the Swarmlord. The monster turned back to the Space Marine. It impaled Valerius on 2 of its swords. It lifted him into the air. Valerius looked the monster in the eye. "For dawn," he whispered. The grenades exploded. The blast was blinding. It tore a hole in the roof. It engulfed the Swarmlord in fire and shrapnel. The monster was thrown backward into the burning stairwell. It roared in frustration as it fell back into the fire. Valerius was gone, vaporized. T'Challa lay on the wet concrete. He was stunned. He saw the Royal Talon lower its ramp right next to him. 2 war dogs jumped out. They grabbed him. They threw him onto the ship. "Go, go, go," Shuri yelled. The ship's engine screamed. The vessel shot upward into the clouds. T'Challa lay on the deck. He looked out the rear hatch as it closed. He saw the roof of the citadel. He saw the hole where the Swarmlord had fallen. He saw the thousands of Tyranids swarming over the edge of the building like ants. The ship punched through the storm clouds. They reached the upper atmosphere. The stars appeared. They were cold and distant. T'Challa sat up. He was dizzy. He looked around. The Magos was plugged into a wall socket, recharging. The surviving Space Marines were sitting in silence, heads bowed. They were mourning their captain. Shuri was crying. T'Challa limped to the cockpit. He looked down at the planet. Hive Tertius was a grey smear on the surface. He could see the Tyranid bioships in orbit. They were like ticks on a dog. "We are clear of the gravity well," the pilot said. "Engaging cloaking drive." "Wait," T'Challa said. "Look." A new fleet had arrived. These were not Tyranid ships. They were Imperial ships. Massive Gothic cathedrals of war. They were miles long. Their prows were armored in gold and adamant. They bore the symbol of the Inquisition, the letter I with a skull. "They are hailing us," the pilot said. "Audio only." T'Challa nodded. "Put it on." A voice filled the cockpit. It was cold, rasping, and absolutely without mercy. "Unidentified vessel. This is Inquisitor Karamazov. You are leaving a condemned zone. Do not attempt to return. The Emperor's justice has arrived." "Justice," T'Challa whispered. On the surface of the planet, the clouds broke. The Imperial ships opened their bombardment bays. They did not fire lasers. They dropped cyclonic torpedoes. These were weapons of last resort. They were planet killers. The torpedoes hit the atmosphere and ignited. They burrowed deep into the crust of the world. T'Challa watched on the monitor. The surface of the planet began to crack. Fire erupted from the fissures. The oceans boiled into steam instantly. The Hive City, the Citadel, the refugees, the Tyranids, the brave soldiers, the mad soldiers, everything was consumed in a wave of fire. The planet did not just burn. It broke. The crust shattered. The atmosphere burned away. In 10 seconds, Hive Tertius was gone. In 1 minute, the entire world was a lifeless ball of magma. Shuri stood beside her brother. She watched the world die. They killed them, she said. They killed everyone, to stop the aliens. They burned the house to kill the rats, T'Challa said. His voice was hollow. Magos Delta 9 disconnected from the wall. He wheeled himself over. He looked at the burning world. He did not look sad. He looked satisfied. The logic is sound, the Mago said. The infection is purged. The threat is neutralized. The biomass is denied to the Great Devourer. It is a victory. T'Challa turned to the Magos. He wanted to hit him. He wanted to scream, but he had no energy left. He realized then that Valerius was right. He had been naive. He thought he could save the world with shields and medicine and hope. But the galaxy did not care about hope. The galaxy only understood fire. We are leaving, T'Challa said. Set a course for the hidden system. We must return to Terra, the Magos said. I must report. You will report nothing, T'Challa said. He walked over to the Magos. He leaned down. You are coming with us. You are going to a cell in the Vibranium mines. You will stay there until you rot. The Magos tried to protest, but the Space Marines stood up. They did not raise their weapons at T'Challa. They looked at the burning planet where their captain had died. They looked at the Magos who had helped cause it. They stepped aside. They let the Wakandans take the tech priest. The Royal Talon turned away from the dead world. It engaged its hyperdrive. The stars stretched into lines of light. They left the horror behind, but they took the horror with them. T'Challa looked at his hands. They were trembling. He looked at his armor. It was scratched and dead. He realized that Wakanda could no longer hide. The Imperium knew they existed. The Tyranids knew what they tasted like. The war had not ended. It had just knocked on their door. T'Challa sat in the pilot's chair. He closed his eyes. He saw Valerius dying. He saw the refugees screaming. He saw the general burning. Brother, Shuri asked softly, what do we do now? T'Challa opened his eyes. They were hard. The kindness was gone. The king was gone. Only the Black Panther remained. We prepare, T'Challa said. We build walls. We build bigger guns. And we never, ever trust them again. This was the final convergence. The offer of alliance was burned to ash. The Wakandans had tried to be heroes, and they had learned the lesson of the 41st millennium. There are no heroes. There is only war. And in the grim darkness of the far future, even the most advanced technology is just another way to die. The ship vanished into the void, leaving only silence and the cooling embers of a murdered planet. The Tyranid Hive Fleet denied its meal, turned slowly in the dark. Its billion eyes looked for a new target, and somewhere, deep in the warp, the laughter of thirsting gods echoed. The asteroid field that was once Hive World Tertius spins silently in the dark. There is no atmosphere left to carry sound. There are no bodies to bury. The cyclonic torpedoes did their work with absolute efficiency. The rock is fused into glass and the ice is boiled into vapor. The Tyranid Hive Fleet denied its biomass, moved on to the next system. They did not mourn the loss. They simply adjusted their trajectory. In the high orbit of the dead world, the Inquisition ship Throne of Judgment lingered for 3 days. Inquisitor Karamazov sat in his armored chair and watched the debris. He did not feel regret. He felt the cold satisfaction of a gardener pruning a diseased branch. He dictated his final report to a servitor. He classified the incident as a localized warp storm event. He erased all mention of the Wakandans. He erased the name of General Cage. He listed the Imperial Fists squad, led by Captain Valerius, as lost to the warp. In the Imperium, history is not what happened. History is what the Inquisition says happened. The truth was too dangerous. The idea that a hidden human civilization possessed technology superior to Mars was a cancer that could destabilize the entire sector. So the truth was burned along with the planet. Far away, in the Segmentum Tempestus, the hidden system of Wakanda went dark. The holographic camouflage screens were dialed to maximum density. The negotiation channels were cut. King T'Challa stood in the war room of the Golden City. The room was usually bright and filled with the sounds of debate. Now it was silent. The map of the galaxy was still there, but the red zones of the Imperium were no longer marked as potential allies. They were marked as hostiles. T'Challa looked at the 5 surviving Space Marines. They stood in the corner, armor battered and unpainted. They had scraped off the yellow of the Imperial Fists. They could never go home. To return would mean execution for the crime of surviving alongside Xenos. They were Ronin now, masterless warriors. They had sworn a new oath, not to the Emperor, but to the King who had saved them. They would train the Wakandan war dogs. They would teach them the brutal, unforgiving tactics of the Astartes. They would teach them that honor is a weakness, and victory is the only currency that matters. Shuri was in her laboratory. She was not designing medical scanners or water purifiers. She was looking at the schematics of the heavy bolter the Space Marines had brought with them. She was reverse engineering the mass reactive explosive shells. She was combining them with sonic payloads. She worked with a cold intensity. The smile that used to light up her face was gone. She had seen a world burn because she tried to help it. She understood now what her brother had told her. The galaxy was not a place of discovery. It was a fighting pit. Margot's Delta 9 was in a containment cell deep below the Vibranium mines. He was disconnected from the noosphere. He could not speak to other machines. He spent his days scratching equations into the walls of his cell. He was trying to solve the riddle of the Vibranium soul. He was mad, but in his madness, he was happy. He was close to the source. He was the only member of the Adeptus Mechanicus who knew the truth, and he would never tell it to a living soul. Decades passed. The legend of the black ships became a rumor in the sector. Imperial Guard regiments would whisper about the ghosts of Tertius, who appeared from nowhere to kill monsters and then vanished. But no official records existed. The Imperium ground on, chewing up 1 billion lives a day. The Golden Throne demanded its tithe. The Tyranids consumed. The Orcs fought. Chaos laughed. And in the dark, behind a veil of nebula and stealth fields, Wakanda watched. They did not come out. They did not offer food. They did not offer medicine. They watched the galaxy burn, and they kept their hands on their weapons. The experiment was over. The conclusion was written in the ashes of a dead world. Compassion is a luxury that the 41st millennium cannot afford. The Wakandans had learned the most important lesson of all. In the grim darkness of the far future, there is only war. And if you want to survive, you do not build a bridge. You build a wall. The chronicle ends here, filed in the deepest vault of the Black Library, under the seal of the Hydra. It is a story of what could have been and why it never will be.